HOA president thought she had the perfect plan to destroy her neighbor's life. Late at night, she snuck into the house and mixed poison into a baby's milk bottles. She had no idea whose child she was targeting. When the truth came out, her world completely shattered. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Margaret Williams stood at her kitchen window, her coffee cup trembling in her hands. Across the street, she watched Jessica Chen rock her baby girl on the front porch. The sight made Margaret's blood boil. 3 months, Margaret muttered to herself. 3 months of watching that woman ruin our perfect neighborhood. Margaret was 54 years old and had lived in Riverside Heights for 15 years. As the president of the Homeowners Association, she believed it was her duty to maintain the community's standards. Her gray hair was always perfectly styled, her lawn was always cut, and her white fence was always freshly painted. Everything in her life had to be perfect and controlled. But Jessica Chen had changed everything. Jessica was 26 years old, a nurse who worked night shifts at the county hospital. She had moved into the small house across the street 3 months ago with her 6-month-old daughter, Lily. Jessica was a single mother who had saved every penny to buy that house. She wanted to give her daughter a safe place to grow up. The house wasn't fancy. The paint was a bit old, and the lawn sometimes grew a little too long because Jessica worked so much. But it was clean, and it was home. Jessica always smiled at her neighbors and tried to be friendly, even when she was exhausted from working all night. But Margaret hated everything about Jessica. She hated that Jessica was young and happy. She hated that Jessica had a mixed-race baby. She hated that Jessica drove an old car. Most of all, she hated that despite all of this, Jessica seemed genuinely happy with her life. Margaret had started small with her harassment. First, she left notes on Jessica's door about the lawn being too long. Then she complained about baby Lily crying during the day, even though babies cry naturally. Margaret even called special HOA meetings to discuss standards in the neighborhood, always looking directly at Jessica's house when she spoke. That type of person doesn't belong here, Margaret had said at the last meeting. She's bringing down our property values. But the other neighbors didn't agree. Most people actually liked Jessica. She was always polite and helpful. She would wave at everyone, help elderly neighbors carry their groceries, and her bright smile made people feel good. This only made Margaret angrier. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. Margaret was returning from her morning walk when she saw Jessica's car pull into the driveway. Jessica stepped out slowly, her shoulders heavy with tiredness after working all night at the hospital. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," Jessica called out with a warm smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Margaret didn't respond. She just stared with cold eyes as Jessica carefully lifted the baby carrier from the back seat. Little Lily was sleeping peacefully, her tiny hand curled into a small fist. Jessica's tired face softened with pure love as she looked at her daughter. "Sleep well, my angel," she whispered, kissing Lily's forehead gently. Something inside Margaret snapped at that moment. Seeing such pure love and happiness filled her with a rage she had never felt before. Margaret was alone and bitter. Her own children had moved far away to escape her controlling behavior. Her husband had divorced her years ago. She had nothing but her perfect house and her HOA position. As Jessica disappeared inside her house, Margaret made a terrible decision. She would make Jessica pay for being happy in her neighborhood. That evening, Margaret watched carefully from her window. She saw Jessica preparing for another night shift. Jessica was warming bottles of milk for Lily and putting them in the refrigerator. She was giving careful instructions to Mrs. Park, the elderly Korean woman who babysat Lily during Jessica's night shifts. Margaret had watched this routine many times. She knew Jessica's schedule perfectly. She knew that Mrs. Park always fell asleep around 10 o'clock while watching television. She knew that Jessica wouldn't return home until 6 in the morning. And she knew about the spare key that Jessica kept hidden under a flower pot by the front door. Margaret's twisted mind began forming a dark plan. She would hurt Jessica in the worst way possible. At 11 o'clock that night, Margaret crept across the street like a shadow. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear. She felt excited by her evil plan. She found the spare key exactly where she knew it would be and quietly opened Jessica's front door. The house was silent except for the soft sound of Mrs. Park snoring in the living room. Margaret walked carefully to the kitchen. There in the refrigerator were 3 bottles of milk, each one prepared with love for baby Lily. Margaret pulled a small bottle of hand sanitizer from her purse. The label clearly read 70% alcohol, for external use only. Her hands shook as she opened the first milk bottle. For just a moment, Margaret hesitated. She looked at the innocent baby bottles, each one prepared with such care. But her hatred was stronger than any conscience she had left. With deliberate cruelty, Margaret squeezed a large amount of hand sanitizer into the milk. She mixed it carefully to hide what she had done. Then she did the same thing to the second bottle and the third bottle. As she worked, Margaret imagined Jessica's face when she discovered what had happened. She pictured the chaos and the panic. Jessica would finally understand what it felt like to have her perfect world destroyed. Margaret put the bottles back in the refrigerator and slipped out of the house as quietly as she had entered. She went back to her own house and went to bed. That night, she slept better than she had in months. The next morning started normally. Jessica returned from her hospital shift at 6:30, tired but eager to see her daughter. She found Mrs. Park getting ready to leave and Lily just starting to wake up. She was perfect all night, Mrs. Park said with a smile. Slept until about an hour ago. Jessica paid Mrs. Park and thanked her warmly. Then she picked up Lily and held her close. "Good morning, my beautiful girl," she whispered, breathing in that sweet baby smell that she loved so much. Lily made happy sounds and reached her tiny hands toward her mother's face. Jessica's tiredness disappeared as she looked into those bright, innocent eyes. This was what made all the hard work worth it. After changing Lily's diaper, Jessica went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. She took one of the bottles from the refrigerator, the same bottle that Margaret had poisoned just hours before. The milk looked normal and smelled normal. Jessica had no reason to think anything was wrong. She warmed the bottle carefully, testing the temperature on her wrist like she always did. Everything seemed fine. Lily was getting fussy, making those small hungry sounds that meant it was feeding time. Jessica sat in the rocking chair by the window where she fed Lily every morning. Sunshine was coming through the curtains, and Lily looked up at her mother with complete trust and love. "Here you go, sweetheart," Jessica said softly, offering the bottle to Lily. Lily took the bottle immediately, her tiny hands holding it as she drank. Jessica smiled and stroked her daughter's soft hair, humming a gentle song. These quiet moments were the best part of her day. But within minutes, something went terribly wrong. Lily began to cough and choke. Milk came out of her mouth. Her little face started turning red, and she began crying, not her normal cry, but a sound of pain and distress that made Jessica's heart stop. "What's wrong, baby?" Jessica asked, pulling the bottle away and sitting Lily up to pat her back. But Lily's crying got worse. She was arching her back, her tiny fists were clenched, and her breathing seemed difficult. Jessica's nursing training kicked in immediately. This wasn't normal. Something was seriously wrong. Jessica grabbed her phone with shaking hands and called 911, holding Lily carefully as her daughter cried in pain. "911, what's your emergency?" "My baby. Something's wrong with my baby." Jessica gasped, her voice breaking with fear. She was drinking her bottle and now she can't breathe properly and won't stop crying. "Please, I need an ambulance." "Stay calm, ma'am. An ambulance is coming. Can you describe what's happening?" Jessica described Lily's symptoms while trying to stay calm. Every second felt like forever as she watched her daughter suffer. The baby's cries were getting weaker, which was even more frightening. The paramedics arrived quickly, followed by police officers. As they worked on Lily, one officer began asking Jessica questions about what had happened. Jessica told them about the feeding and how everything had seemed normal until Lily started having problems. "Ma'am, we need to take the bottle and any remaining milk for testing," the officer explained. "This could be accidental poisoning, but we need to check everything." The word poisoning hit Jessica like a punch. Poisoning? How could she be poisoned? "I made the bottles myself last night. I always do everything the same way." At the hospital, Jessica paced back and forth in the waiting room while doctors worked on Lily. The baby had been rushed into the emergency room, and Jessica wasn't allowed to go with her. She was alone, terrified, and desperate for news about her daughter. Dr. Martinez, the pediatric emergency doctor, finally came out of the treatment room. His face was serious as he approached Jessica. "Ms. Chen, your daughter is stable now, but I need to ask you some important questions. The first tests show that Lily has swallowed a large amount of alcohol. Can you explain how this might have happened?" Jessica's legs felt weak and she fell into a chair. "Alcohol? That's impossible. I don't drink. I never have alcohol in my house. I made her bottle exactly like I always do. The tests show this was isopropyl alcohol, like what's in hand sanitizer. Are you sure no one else could have touched the bottles?" The truth hit Jessica like lightning. Someone had deliberately poisoned her baby. Someone had come into her home and put poison in Lily's milk on purpose. The thought made her feel sick. Who could hate a 6-month-old baby so much that they would try to poison her? Jessica's mind raced through every person who knew her routine, every neighbor who had seen her coming and going. The spare key under the flower pot. She had mentioned it to several neighbors, trying to be friendly. "Oh God," Jessica whispered, her hands shaking. "Someone wanted to hurt my baby. Someone actually wanted to hurt Lily. I need to call the police," Jessica said quietly. "Someone did this on purpose. Someone tried to kill my baby." Dr. Martinez nodded seriously. "We've already called them. Detective Harris is coming now. Jessica, I want you to know that Lily is going to be okay. She's strong and we found the problem early. But you need to think carefully about anyone who might have been able to get into your home." Jessica closed her eyes, trying to process the horror of what had happened. Someone had stood in her kitchen. Someone had held Lily's bottles in their hands. Someone had deliberately put poison in them. The violation felt almost as bad as the physical harm to her daughter. Detective James Harris arrived at the hospital within an hour. He was a 38-year-old veteran of the police force who had seen terrible things but still believed in justice. He was also the police chief of Riverside Heights. More importantly, though Jessica had never told anyone in the neighborhood, James was Lily's father. Their relationship had been complicated from the start. Jessica and James had met at a coffee shop 2 years ago. Both were dealing with difficult times in their lives. Jessica was working her way through nursing school, and James was going through a painful divorce. They had found comfort in each other during those hard months. Their romance had been brief but meaningful. They both realized that while they cared deeply for each other, they weren't meant to be together forever. The breakup had been friendly, with both agreeing to stay friends. When Jessica discovered she was pregnant, she had been scared to tell James. She was afraid he might think she was trying to trap him. But James had surprised her. Even though their romance was over, he immediately stepped up as a father. He had supported Jessica throughout her pregnancy, went to doctor's appointments with her, and was there when Lily was born. He loved his daughter with an intensity that sometimes scared him. The one thing they had agreed on was keeping their relationship private. James's job as police chief often put him in dangerous situations. They both felt it was safer if his connection to Jessica and Lily wasn't public knowledge. In the small community, Jessica was known as a single mother, and James was simply the police chief who sometimes checked on the neighborhood. When James got the call that Lily was in the hospital, his police training fought with his panic as a father. He had been in a meeting when his phone rang. The moment he heard Lily and hospital in the same sentence, nothing else mattered. James had left the meeting so fast that his assistant had followed him, worried. "Chief Harris, what's wrong? You look terrible." "My daughter," James had said, his voice barely controlled. "Someone hurt my daughter." Now, as he walked through the hospital hallways, James felt a cold anger building inside him. Someone had targeted his child. Someone had entered Jessica's home planning to harm an innocent baby. When he saw Jessica in the waiting room with tears running down her face and her whole body shaking, something inside him broke. She looked so small and vulnerable and completely devastated. Jessica looked up and saw him coming. The relief in her eyes was overwhelming. "James," she whispered, standing up on shaky legs. "Someone poisoned her. Someone actually poisoned our baby." James pulled Jessica into his arms, holding her tightly as she broke down completely. "I'm going to find who did this," James said, his voice low and dangerous. "I promise you, Jessica. Whoever did this will pay." Dr. Martinez updated them on Lily's condition. The baby was responding well to treatment, but she would need to stay in the hospital for observation. The alcohol had caused serious distress to her system. While the doctors were hopeful, the next 24 hours would be critical. The investigation became James's entire world. He worked 18-hour days, following every lead, interviewing every neighbor, and analyzing every piece of evidence. His captain had suggested he step back from the case because it was personal. But James had convinced him that his knowledge of the family's routine made him the best person for the job. What James didn't tell his captain was that every time he looked at Lily in her hospital bed, so small with tubes and wires attached to her tiny body, he felt a rage so strong it frightened him. The forensics team worked day and night processing Jessica's house. They checked for fingerprints, collected DNA samples, and analyzed every surface that the criminal might have touched. James supervised every step, his trained eye catching details that others might miss. "Detective, we've got something interesting here," the lead forensics technician called from the kitchen. James walked over to the refrigerator where the technician was using a special light to show fingerprint patterns. "See this mark on the handle? It's not Jessica's prints and it's not the babysitter's. Someone else opened this refrigerator recently." James felt his heart beat faster. "Can you get a clear print for identification?" "I think so. Give me a few more minutes." While the team worked, James walked through the house, trying to think like the criminal. They had known about the spare key, which meant they had been watching the house carefully. They had known Jessica's work schedule and Mrs. Park's routine. This wasn't random. It was targeted, planned, and personal. In Lily's nursery, James stood beside the crib where his daughter should have been sleeping safely. Instead, she was fighting for her life in a hospital because someone's hatred had driven them to poison an innocent child. The walls were painted soft yellow with hand-painted flowers that Jessica had done herself during her pregnancy. There were photos of Lily's first months, each one showing a healthy, happy baby surrounded by love. James picked up one of Lily's stuffed animals, a small teddy bear that he had given her when she was born. He held it gently, remembering the day he first held his daughter and the overwhelming love he had felt. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Dr. Martinez says Lily is responding better. They think she can come home tomorrow." James felt some tension leave his shoulders. Lily was going to be okay. Now he needed to make sure whoever did this would pay for their crime. "We've got clear prints, detective," the technician called. "Running them through the database now." James watched as the fingerprint data was uploaded to the police database. Within minutes, they had a match. Margaret Williams. 54 years old. Lives across the street from Jessica, previous arrests for harassment and trespassing, all involving neighbor disputes. James stared at the information, his jaw clenching as the pieces fell into place. Margaret had been arrested twice for harassing neighbors and once for trespassing. All of them were disputes about neighborhood standards and HOA rules. "That's our criminal," James said grimly. "Margaret Williams. She lives right across the street." The technician looked up from his computer. "Detective, we also found traces of hand sanitizer on the bottle caps. It matches the exact brand found in the baby's milk. Same batch number and everything." James felt the case building around Margaret like a trap. She had left evidence that would be impossible to explain away. But before he arrested her, he wanted to understand why. What could drive someone to poison an innocent baby? James spent the next several hours researching Margaret's background. What he found showed a deeply troubled woman whose life had been full of failures and disappointments. Her husband had divorced her 5 years ago, citing her controlling and erratic behavior. Her 2 adult children had moved across the country and rarely contacted her. Margaret had no history of violence, but there was a clear pattern of conflicts with neighbors. She had filed dozens of complaints with the HOA, the police, and city officials about various neighbors over the years. Most were dismissed as meaningless, but they showed a woman obsessed with control who couldn't tolerate anyone different from her narrow view of how things should be. The most disturbing part was a series of anonymous complaints Margaret had filed with Child Protective Services against various families in the neighborhood. None of the complaints were true, but they showed a willingness to use the system to attack families she didn't like. James closed the file and rubbed his tired eyes. He had seen plenty of evil in his career, but this felt different. This was evil disguised as caring about the community. It was hatred pretending to be concerned for standards. That evening, James sat beside Lily's hospital bed while Jessica slept in the chair next to him. Lily was breathing easier now. Her color had returned to normal, and the doctors were positive about her full recovery. But James couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to losing her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered to his sleeping daughter. "Daddy should have protected you better." Lily moved slightly in her sleep, her tiny hand curling around James's finger. The gesture was so trusting and innocent that it brought tears to his eyes. She had no idea someone had tried to hurt her. To Lily, the world was still a safe place because that's all she had ever known. James made a silent promise to his daughter that night. He would make sure she grew up in a world where she never had to face that kind of hatred. And he would make sure Margaret Williams paid for what she had done. The next morning, James stood on Margaret's doorstep at 7 o'clock. He was in full uniform, his badge shining in the morning sun. When Margaret opened the door, she was clearly surprised to see the police chief. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Chief Harris. I need to speak with you about the incident at the Chin residence." Margaret's face went pale, but she quickly tried to compose herself. "I don't know what you're talking about." "What incident?" "Someone poisoned Jessica Chen's baby yesterday. I'm investigating attempted murder." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She hadn't meant to kill the baby. She had just wanted to make Jessica suffer. But as she looked at the tall police chief standing on her doorstep, she realized how serious this was. I don't know anything about that," Margaret stammered. "Why would you think I know anything?" "Because you've been harassing Ms. Chen for months, because you had access to her property. Because you've made it clear you want her family out of this neighborhood." Margaret's mind raced. She needed to stay calm and not admit anything. "I may have had some disagreements with Ms. Chen about HOA rules, but I would never hurt anyone." James studied her face carefully. He could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at him. "Mrs. Williams, a 6-month-old baby is in the hospital fighting for her life because someone put hand sanitizer in her milk. That person had to have access to the house and knowledge of the family's routine. That person wanted to cause serious harm to an innocent child." "That's terrible," Margaret said, trying to sound shocked. "I hope you catch whoever did such an awful thing." "I will," James replied, his voice cold. "And when I do, they'll face charges for attempted murder, breaking and entering, and child endangerment. The evidence will tell us exactly who did this." After James left, Margaret began to panic. She hadn't thought about the police testing the milk or finding fingerprints. She had acted out of pure hatred without thinking about the consequences. That afternoon, the forensics results came back. The hand sanitizer in Lily's milk was a specific brand, the same brand that Margaret had in her purse. More importantly, traces of Margaret's DNA were on the bottle caps, and her fingerprints were on the refrigerator handle. James felt cold satisfaction as he read the report. He had the evidence he needed to arrest the woman who had poisoned his daughter. At the hospital, Jessica was holding Lily for the first time since the poisoning. The baby was awake and alert, her eyes bright as she looked at her mother. The doctors said she would make a complete recovery, but the trauma would stay with Jessica forever. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Martinez told James. "She's a fighter, just like her parents." James approached carefully, his heart breaking at the sight of his daughter with medical equipment still attached to her tiny body. Jessica looked up at him with tired but grateful eyes. "The test results came back," James said quietly. "We have enough evidence to make an arrest." Jessica nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Good. I want her to pay for what she did to Lily." James gently touched Lily's cheek with his finger. She grabbed it with her tiny hand, and he felt protective love so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. "She will," he promised. "I'm going to make sure she faces the full consequences." The next morning, James returned to Margaret's house with an arrest warrant and backup officers. Margaret answered the door in her bathrobe, her face tired from a sleepless night. "Margaret Williams, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Lily Chen, breaking and entering, and child endangerment," James announced firmly. Margaret's face crumpled as James read her rights. The reality of what she had done and what it would cost her finally hit home. She had destroyed her own life in her quest to destroy Jessica's. As James led her to the police car, neighbors began coming out of their houses. Word of the arrest spread quickly through the community. People who had known Margaret for years stood in shock, unable to believe what she had done. Mrs. Park was in the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "How could she do such a thing?" she whispered to another neighbor. "That poor baby, that poor mother." The trial that followed was one of the most emotional cases the county had seen in years. The prosecutor built a strong case that showed Margaret as a dangerous woman driven by racial hatred and obsessive need for control. The evidence was overwhelming. Margaret's fingerprints were on the bottle caps and refrigerator handle. The hand sanitizer in Lily's milk matched exactly the brand and batch number of the bottle in Margaret's purse. Security cameras from neighboring houses showed Margaret crossing the street at the time of the poisoning. But perhaps the most damaging evidence was Margaret's history of harassing Jessica and her family. The prosecution presented months of documentation, the passive-aggressive notes, the frivolous HOA complaints, the anonymous calls to child services, and witness testimony about Margaret's increasingly hostile behavior. Dr. Martinez testified about Lily's condition when she arrived at the hospital. His testimony was so detailed that several jurors looked shaken. The amount of alcohol in the child's system was enough to cause breathing problems, potential brain damage, and in the worst case, death, Dr. Martinez explained. "If the mother hadn't brought her in when she did, we could be looking at a very different outcome." Jessica's testimony was the emotional heart of the trial. She described the morning of the poisoning in painful detail, the normal routine, Lily's trust as she took the bottle, the sudden horror as her daughter began to suffer. "I keep thinking about that moment when I gave her the bottle," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "She looked up at me with complete trust. She believed I would never let anything hurt her. And I failed her. I gave her poison because I trusted my community and believed we were safe." Jessica had to pause several times as she cried. The jury watched in silence as this young mother described the worst experience of her life. When it was James's turn to testify, he struggled to stay professional. As the investigating detective, he presented the evidence carefully and objectively. But when asked about the personal impact, his controlled appearance cracked. "Your Honor, This case represents everything I became a police officer to fight against, James said, his voice steady but his eyes showing intense emotion. The deliberate targeting of an innocent child because of racial prejudice is not just a crime. It's an attack on everything our community should stand for. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, their faces showed determination. The foreman stood to read the verdict. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Margaret Williams guilty. On the charge of breaking and entering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. Margaret collapsed in her chair as each guilty verdict was read. She would spend the next 15 to 25 years in prison. During sentencing, Judge Patricia Rodriguez delivered a strong statement. Mrs. Williams, in my 30 years as a judge, I have seen many terrible crimes. But I have rarely seen such a calculated attack on innocence. You didn't just poison a bottle of milk. You poisoned the sense of safety that every family deserves. The judge sentenced Margaret to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. After the trial, the Riverside Heights community transformed remarkably. The neighborhood that had been divided by Margaret's toxic influence came together to support Jessica and Lily. A community fund was established to help with medical expenses and to help Jessica feel safe in her home again. The Chin House became the heart of neighborhood life. Parents brought their children to play with Lily. Neighbors stopped by with food and offers to help. Mrs. Park became a permanent part of their lives, treating Lily like her own grandchild. James found himself welcomed into the community in a way he never expected. His relationship with Jessica evolved into something deeper. While they didn't rush back into romance, there was an understanding that their bond had been strengthened by what they went through together. Lily thrived in this environment of love and protection. She grew from a baby into a happy toddler, surrounded by people who would do anything to keep her safe. 3 years after the poisoning, Lily celebrated her 4th birthday with a party that filled the entire street. Children played while parents gathered around picnic tables sharing food and stories. James watched from the porch as Lily played with her friends, her laughter bright and carefree. She has no memory of what happened, Jessica said, joining James on the porch. Sometimes I wonder if that's a blessing or if she should know how many people fought to protect her. She'll know, James replied. Maybe not the details, but she'll know she's loved and safe. And when she's older, she'll understand that sometimes good people have to stand up against hatred. As the sun set over Riverside Heights, Jessica reflected on how much had changed. The house that had felt like a place of fear had become a home filled with joy. The neighborhood that had harbored darkness had learned to shine with genuine community spirit. Lily would grow up knowing that while evil exists, there are always people willing to stand against it. She would know her father was a hero who fought for justice, her mother was strong and protective, and that true strength comes from love, not hate. The story of what happened in Riverside Heights became more than a cautionary tale about hatred. It became a testament to the power of community, the strength of love, and the possibility of healing even after the worst betrayal. Margaret's plan had backfired completely. Instead of driving Jessica and Lily away, her actions had made them permanent, beloved members of the community. Instead of maintaining control, she had lost everything. 5 years after the poisoning, Jessica received an unexpected letter from Margaret in prison. Her hands shook as she opened it, unsure if she was ready to hear from the woman who had tried to kill her daughter. The letter was raw and honest, a confession from a woman who finally understood what she had done. Dear Jessica, it began. I know I have no right to contact you. I need you to know that not a day passes that I don't think about what I did to your beautiful daughter. I was consumed by hatred and jealousy. I told myself I was protecting the neighborhood, but the truth is I was just bitter and couldn't stand seeing someone else's happiness. I know I can never undo what I did. There are no words to express my remorse. I just wanted you to know that therapy has helped me understand that what I did came from my own pain, not from anything you did wrong. You were a perfect neighbor. I was the problem, and I am deeply sorry. Jessica read the letter several times before showing it to James. They sat in their kitchen and discussed what it meant. "Do you think she's sincere?" Jessica asked. James studied the letter carefully. "I think prison and therapy have given her perspective. Whether that makes her truly reformed, I don't know. But I think her remorse is real." After weeks of thought, Jessica decided to write a brief response. "Margaret, I received your letter. While I cannot say I forgive you, I no longer carry anger toward you. Lily is thriving. Our community is stronger. I hope you find peace and use your time to help others avoid the path you took." Sending that letter felt like closing a final chapter. Jessica had faced her daughter's attacker with grace, just as she had faced everything in her life. Lily was now 7 years old, doing well in school and involved in community activities. She played soccer on a team James coached, took piano lessons from Mrs. Park, and had inherited her mother's compassion. One day, Lily came home with questions Sarah had been dreading. "Mommy, Kayla's mom said something weird happened to me when I was a baby. Something about a bad lady." Jessica's heart raced, but she had prepared for this. She sat Lily down and explained in simple terms that sometimes adults make very bad choices. "A long time ago, there was a lady in our neighborhood who was very unhappy. Instead of asking for help, she made a choice to hurt you because she didn't like that Daddy and I were different." "Did she go to jail?" Lily asked. "Yes. Daddy helped catch her and she's in jail where she can't hurt anyone." "Am I safe now?" "You are very safe. Daddy and I and all our neighbors work hard every day to keep you safe." Lily nodded, then asked something that touched Jessica's heart. "Was the lady sad? Like really sad inside?" Jessica was amazed by her daughter's empathy. "Yes, sweetheart. I think she was very sad and confused. Maybe she needed more hugs," Lily said with simple childhood wisdom. That night, Jessica and James talked about how remarkable their daughter was. "She's going to change the world," James said. "She already has," Jessica replied. "She changed ours." The Riverside Heights community had been transformed by Lily's story. The neighborhood now hosted annual diversity celebrations and community events that brought families together. Jessica's advocacy work expanded beyond their neighborhood. She spoke at conferences about recognizing and addressing bias before it escalates. Her message was always the same: communities have the power to choose love over hate. James had been promoted partly due to his work on Lily's case, but mostly because his approach to community policing had become a model for other departments. On Lily's 8th birthday, the celebration was bigger than ever. As the party wound down, Jessica found herself in the same spot where she used to rock Lily as a baby. She thought about Margaret in prison, missing out on all the beauty life could offer when people choose to open their hearts. She hoped Margaret would use her time to help prevent other families from experiencing what they had endured. But mostly Jessica thought about Lily, running through the yard with friends, her laughter bright and free. This child who had survived an attack motivated by hatred had grown into a beacon of love and acceptance. As the sun set, Sarah gathered Lily for their nightly ritual. "Tell me about your day, sweetheart." "It was perfect, Mommy. All my friends came and Mrs. Park played piano and Daddy taught us games and everyone was happy." "What made it perfect?" Lily thought for a moment, then smiled. "Because everyone I love was together and no one was sad or angry. It was just perfect." Jessica held her daughter close and whispered the same words she had spoken every night since bringing Lily home from the hospital. "You are loved, little one. You are safe and you are loved." In that moment, surrounded by the warm sounds of their community, Jessica knew that love had won. Not just in their case, but in how their story had touched other lives and communities who needed to know that hatred doesn't have to have the last word. Lily would grow up knowing that while evil exists, there are always people willing to stand against it. She would know her parents were heroes, her community was family, and that true strength comes from love, not hate. The house that had been the site of darkness was now filled with light, laughter, and the promise of a future where children like Lily could grow up safe, knowing they are cherished exactly as they are. And that truly was the greatest victory of all.